One. Hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is Brandon from freestatecolorado.com with a special guest, Natalie Menten. Natalie, how are you today?
Doing fine, thanks.
Well, Natalie, one of the biggest topics down at the state capitol this year has to do with trains, transit, RTD, a lot of issues going on down there. So I'm really excited to get your perspective as a former board member for RTD to give us some insight into what's going on with RTD and transit this year.
Happy to talk about it. It's big topics. We've got trains, we got buses, we got dense housing, we've got subsidized ridership that taxpayers pay for, ridership expectations that have not materialized. A lot to go on this subject. Let's go.
Perfect. Perfect. So, of course, part of the conversation here is the government mandated density. A lot
Mhm.
of bills we've seen are kind of companion bills to these transit bills that we're seeing. This transit corridors and this kind of or incentives for taxpayer money and grants to these communities to build these high density housing around these transit corridors. It's kind of the other piece of the puzzle here with what the legislature is really trying to do this year.
Yeah, there's carrots, there's sticks. They've still got some of the carrots left, but now they're bringing out the big sticks. And it all boils down to they can spend a lot of money, have already, on public transportation. The ridership projections did not materialize on a vast majority of it, actually continue to be shrunk. And their push is, well, we've got to build that high density housing there. We'll make it difficult for people to park, make difficult, more expensive to have freedom of your own transportation, and we'll basically make the system work. That's the big overarching story with this.
Definitely. I mean, these legislators want to totally re-engineer society towards their vision of, people crammed into these big apartment buildings, forced to take transit, like you said, losing that freedom of the cars and losing our open space and our beautiful Colorado skies. I mean, it's kind of a pipe dream in my mind because I don't think people move to Colorado to go to another Chicago or a New York or Los Angeles. They're here to enjoy our beautiful skies, our outdoor open spaces, and have that freedom to travel. We have such a big state. A lot of people have to commute just to get to work. So to really think that they can force society into this little model that they have, it seems I just don't think it's going to work.
Well, in their, in our setup, for me, when I take a lot of my trips, I'm not only doing one task, I'm doing two tasks. And to be able to fit that in with public transit, I mean, as a former board director, I have a free transit pass for life, and I do not break it out that often because, frankly, when I'm going, let's say, downtown to a hearing, and we stop on the way home to get some stuff for groceries, it just doesn't work in regular life. I mean, who does really want to actually carry around a bag of potatoes, 10-pound bag of potatoes, and their 20 or 50-pound bag of dog food on the bus or a train? It's just, for a lot of lifestyles, it won't work. To have choice is great, but the government now is actually taking out a big stick and threatening to take away funding that we've paid in for our roads and take that away unless we comply. And that is called force over freedom, and it's not appropriate for government.
Oh, well said. Let's dig into some of the past here and kind of see what led us up to this point.
Okay.
So back in 2021, this bill was passed, Senate Bill 238, to create this Front Range Passenger Rail District. So for those people who've watched some of our videos before, they know a district. It's a special district. It's a taxing entity. It's a local level of government. And this Front Range Passenger Rail District, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the largest or one of the largest districts, special districts in the entire state. So that's the idea, right? To create along the entire Front Range, the entire length of Colorado, this Front Range passenger rail. And so, kind of the genesis of it back in 2021, kind of creating this district, creating this governmental organization that we're going to start to see some results from. So, moving on, let's see here. So this is from the website for this Front Range Passenger Rail District. So established years ago, they have a pretty good website, a lot of information about what they're trying to do. So this map here gives you an idea from all the way down south in Trinidad up to Fort Collins and even future connections in Wyoming. I mean, these guys have big plans to connect the entire Front Range with rail. And, I really think it might be unrealistic for a couple of reasons we're hoping to get into today. But just wanted to point this out, and especially in the middle here, if you read that district authority, this FRPR district has the authority to levy taxes through ballot measures, of course, thanks to Tabor, to fund and support rail programs, including establishing station area improvement districts. So there you go. It has a board of directors, 17 voting and 7 non-voting members, who coordinates with CDOT, RTD, freight railroads, regional planning organizations, and local communities. So of course, it's really important. You have so many different counties, as it says here, 13 counties, numerous communities, and all these other governmental districts that this big district has to work with.
Yeah, and that is a lot of governments that are intertwined there. It also makes me wonder as we're going through what those main bullet points are of the district that's just been formed here, well, as in a couple of years ago, is who will have the power of eminent domain. Because when they are looking at this complete system, we'll see in these accompanying bills, there is a lot of talk about development. There's talk about property taxes being added, use of tax increment financing, which is an urban renewal tool, tied to eminent domain, which is condemnation, taking of private property for a public purpose. And government over years has now really got a twisted vision of what public purpose is. So, it's not only if a developer is going to bring in more money, then say you are, that could be considered a public purpose or given more money. So this is a big thing, and I'm not surprised it's the biggest special district in Colorado. The big problem we've got here, though, is the governance, which is governed by a board of directors, in coordinating with some appointees, but then also some elected. But for an elected representation, that's not present here.
It's a good point. For all the talk of democracy and letting individuals have a say in the government, it doesn't seem like when you're talking about the Front Range Passenger Rail District that there's not a lot of public input.
Yeah. Well, and you said it's pretty smooth website. Frankly, the first time I started to go through the websites leading to the breadcrumbs, which ended up being ridethefrontrange.com, it was actually complicated. Well, it is a complicated a web of different bodies, and I won't go down in the weeds. We're supposed to keep this short, so I'll let you go to the next slide.
Perfect. Let's take a look at it. So here's an article from September 29th, 2023 from CPR.org. As always, the links are kind of listed there at the bottom. We're going to be talking about some different news coverage of this issue in this video. So just reading from the article, Polis wants to land billions for Front Range Rail. He's looking to local leaders for help. So I'll just read this brief excerpt from the article. The Front Range Rail project could have one key advantage over RTD and its unfinished Fast Tracks rail line to Boulder and Longmont. That's Amtrak. RTD's Boulder train has been delayed by decades, partially because track owner BNSF Railway quoted a lease price much higher than planners were able to pay. Get into that in a second. Front Range rail planners, on the other hand, may hire Amtrak to operate the line. And Amtrak, under federal law, has a guaranteed right to access freight lines owned by companies like BNSF, said John Putnam, a former U.S. Department of Transportation lawyer and a new senior advisor at the Colorado Department of Transportation. Just briefly wanted to say, if they can't afford it, right? When you look at costs, when you look at the economy and the free market, I mean, the use of this railway has a significant cost, right? And this railway company is spending the money to maintain these railroads, and they have a cost that, if these passenger trains are running, they can't necessarily run their freight trains across it. So, that's a big red flag right there for anybody with a more libertarian type of mindset or a free market type of mindset to know that RTD's plan to build this train, they can't afford it. They can't afford to do it. So the free market itself is kind of preventing them. And it's of course, they have to use the federal law, allowing Amtrak to use it. But what's your input on this, Natalie?
Well, go back a slide to the map of the whole Front Range, because I want to use that visual for just a moment. Okay, so if we look at this train path here, if we look at the link between Boulder and Longmont there, the issue there, that's the section of the line that is the controversial part where they're saying the railroad quoted them too high of a price. But at the end of the day, if you look back at all the historical documents here, part of the problem was when RTD Fast Tracks, and actually probably prior to that, but we know for sure the Fast Tracks, The general manager at that time was Cal Marcella, and he was going out trying to sell and pitch Fast Track's project to get buy-in so that they could go to the ballot and have a win on this. What the sections of this line were supposed to be justified within this planning. The ridership is going to be there. There's a reason to build it, basically. This section of that same line, Boulder to Longmont there, was a push because Cal Marcelo went up there pitching and even leading up from actually even further south of Boulder, pitching the plan to them, but the ridership really wasn't there. And especially because, get down to the weeds here, Boulder gets a called bus rapid transit path from downtown to, and they're going to get it this rail. So they're getting a twofer basically. But with the problem I'm seeing at this point, we are dependent on a commerce private sector railroad to give up part of its line right here at the whim of the state. Well, that's disrupting commerce, and it will always forever, because of the coordination needed there, be a weaker link in this whole plan. So I have concerns about that, and I really wanted to bring that out because I don't see as many people really talking about the long range and how that will affect. Fortunately, Nate Miner right now is on a leave from Colorado Public Radio. Once he's back, he was a full-time reporter for transportation. He'll be doing a lot more coverage of this. Andy Kenny is doing a fabulous job because he's covering the Capitol and RTD on site, plus these other things. So anyway, I got off track, but I think it's very important to remember when we're talking all this investment, and then we're going to hinge it off that line. This plan has not been drawn firmly. Is that the best path? Is this all in the best idea when ridership has not materialized like they have said in the past? The state legislature wants to, as we'll talk about just in a second, have more control over RTD, but can you bake up this ridership when there are other alternatives that people obviously prefer? So, all right, I'll let you go there.
Perfect. So that was an article from September of last year, kind of talking about some of the groundwork, some of Polis's plans that we're now seeing come to fruition in this legislative session in 2024. So looking at this year, here's another article from KDVR.com. Leaders join Polis to celebrate path to completion for Front Range Rail projects. This was from March 7th. Quoting from the article, Senate President Steve Fenberg said he's encouraging the Regional Transportation District, Colorado Department of Transportation, and those involved in the Front Range Passenger Rail Project to work together on the mission. This is Fenberg. I'm working on legislation to accomplish a few things. Number one, it encourages RTD, Front Range Passenger Rail, and CDOT to explore options for coordination and collaboration on efforts to secure funding to establish passenger rail service from Denver to Fort Collins via Boulder, Longmont, and Loveland, Fenberg said. So that's kind of a little preview of some of his legislation we're going to look at here soon.
And let's say one word there I would really call suspect, and that is where it says it encourages RTD. Bill drafts of that are a lot more than encouraging. And when RTD can't even finish what it's doing now, can't manage ridership. I'll stop there. Let's go next slide.
Next slide.
So you can't do that, and you want to double down? How's that going to work?
Here's a bill that has passed this year. So one of the transit bills that we've seen pass is House Bill 1012 concerning the operational efficiency of the Front Range Passenger Rail District. Something we covered in our weekly legislative calls. But one of the big things on this bill is some of these summary items here I'll read. Removing the requirement that the board hold an annual joint meeting with the Transportation Commission, the I-70 Coalition Board, or any successor entity, and the Regional Transportation District Board, and instead requiring the board to provide an annual update to these entities, which may be provided electronically. So we're kind of seeing that passenger rail getting that separation to operate more efficiently, because maybe they don't have to cooperate as much with these other groups like Fenberg was claiming. Next bullet point, eliminating the requirement that board members appointed by the transportation planning organizations be confirmed by the Senate. So there's our lack of democracy. If we're not having elected representatives, elected senators deciding if these board members should be appointed or not, we're letting these other organizations just appoint people at their whim. That's kind of a red flag there, but of course would make it more efficient if they don't have to be accountable to an elected body. Next bullet point, establishing that the board exercises its powers by a majority vote of a quorum of its voting directors rather than a majority vote of a quorum of its total membership. So making it easier, thus more efficient to pass their resolutions, pass their plans, and get things moving along without having to consult their entire total membership. Next bullet point, allowing the board to delegate to its officers and employees the power to enter into routine contracts for day-to-day administration of the district, other than some other ones there. So kind of just streamlining things, making this government program more efficient, changes the name of the state required district plan for developing a rail service. So, if as a libertarian minded person, efficiency in government is a bad thing. They're bypassing some of the checks and balances, some of the safeguards that have prevented this passenger rail district from just doing whatever they want, but they're trying to remove that this year and get things moving. What do you think, Natalie?
Well, I've done so much homework on the fast tracks thing. I just kind of see these same flags, and the color of the flags are red in this.
Great point.
Promise is, anyway, to me, this builds a lot of administrative. There's some other things we're going to talk about here in a second that even bring some bigger concerns.
Let's go ahead and check those
A
out.
lot of pieces to this puzzle, baby.
Definitely a big, complicated issue. The governor and his lackeys in the legislature are pushing this through as best they can. So this is Fenberg's bill, Senate Bill 184. Fenberg's, of course, the Senate president, been down there for quite a long time. Of course, was part of the New Era Colorado crew that helped have the Democrats take over Colorado. Very entrenched person in Colorado politics on the Democratic side.
The
So
guy
as
who
you can
just
see,
sponsored the bill to get rid of the definition of public meetings or change it. He's just a great representative down there at the Capitol.
so as you mentioned here, it's the FETA bypass Tabor as well. So kind of just reading this brief summary here, Senate Bill 184, establishing multiple requirements to promote the development of surface transportation, including the front range passenger rail. So this congestion impact fee, red flags when you hear the word fee, because it's just a way not to collect a tax. They call it a fee to try and get around the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So this bill authorizes the Colorado Transportation Investment Office to impose a congestion impact fee on short-term vehicle rentals at up to $3 per day for vehicles with an internal combustion engine and $2 per day for battery electric vehicles. Fee revenue will be collected by Department of Revenue, credited to the Transportation Enterprise Special Revenue Fund, go toward completing, operating, and maintaining multimodal surface transportation infrastructure projects. And the fee is annually adjusted for inflation beginning in 2026. So that fee's going up, folks. I mean, it's getting a lot more expensive to rent a car in Colorado with this bill.
Yeah, I testified down at the Capitol on this one, and was listening to testimony from one of the representatives of the car rental agent industry, and they were given the figure, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it was a notable amount, just amount to think about, that how many people use rental cars, and they are not from out of state, because the whole argument here with Fenberg was, oh, these are tourists, they're coming here to basically suck off us as tourism, and they're using our roads, so we got to get this fee out of them. And the rental car agency was talking about, well, when people get their car catalytic converter stolen and got to get a rental because the car's in the shop or whatever it may be, those are the same people, our neighbors, who are using rental cars, and here we are gouging them. So how's this a legit fee?
Oh,
Besides,
definitely. Great point
rental
there.
car companies pay registration fees anyway. So, it's just sick how they want to bypass Tabor any excuse they can get. And then they use in the enterprises. And what the violation down there is, there should be a warning sign in the door when you're going down there, warning, you're going to be violated.
That's about
That'd be
it.
like a
That's about
Capitol
it.
door.
Continuing with this bill, what else it does? It authorizes the CTIO, the Regional Transportation District, and the Front Range Passenger Rail District, and the Department of Transportation, in accordance with the implementation plan described in the bill, to enter into a standalone intergovernmental agreement or separate legal entity regarding the construction operation of the Northwest Fixed Guideway Corridor, including extension of the corridor to Fort Collins as the first phase of the Front Range Passenger Rail Service. And then it authorizes, this is under the implementation plan, it authorizes RTD to extend construction and operations of the Northwest Rail Fixed Guideway Corridor beyond the boundaries of RTD, including an extension of the corridor to Fort Collins as that first phase. So it must provide a report by September 30th, 2024, containing an implementation plan for construction and operations of the corridor to provide it by January 1st, 2029. So there's the timeline right there they're looking for.
Yeah, so just in the big picture, the government saying we're going to fund part of this plan with rental car fees, and then two, we are going to make the CTIO, RTD, the FRPR, and CDOT work together. And in this deal, because RTD operates the central core of this central core of the state to state, top end to top, we're going to make them work in there, and RTD is going to have to help outside the district. And that's like, where's the dollars coming from? And again, or so we'll get more. I know we got more slides, so we'll keep going.
Perfect. So the status, we're recording this here on April 16th. The bill did pass the Senate on second reading today, April 16th. No surprise there. Expected to fully pass and move on to the House, of course. So that's the most recent update on the bill's status.
Thank you for updating all of that, because it's all moving fast.
It is moving fast. And one of the other bills, this is probably the most controversial bill so far. The first two, some red flags there, of course, but not quite as big of a deal as this. This is House Bill 1447, the Transit Reform Bill. Of course, it's a big bill. It's supposed to be a single subject, but transit reform, I guess, is their subject. Does a lot of things. So, kind of reading the bill summary here, it says it modifies the duties and composition of the board of directors of the Regional Transportation District, RTD, requiring the Department of Transportation to implement a bus driver training program, requiring transit providers to coordinate with metropolitan planning organizations on certain matters, modifying the allowable use of money transferred to the Department of Transportation in connection with the redevelopment of the Burnham Yard rail property. So really should have been, four separate bills, because there's a lot in there, if you ask me. But the biggest part of it, the part that's probably achieved the most outrage, is the changing the composition of RTD, which we're going to get into here.
Yeah.
So this bill is being heard Wednesday. That's today when the bill goes live. This video goes live Wednesday, April 17th at 1:30 p.m. The Transportation, Housing, and Local Government Committee in the House and LSB-A Legislative Service Building. That's across the street from the state capitol on Building A. So keep an eye on that, people. So here's an article from Andrew Kinney over at CPR. This is a screenshot from the article talking about what it does. Of course, Polis plan to fix RTD's long list of broken promises, which dramatically changed the November election. And of course, it has to do with RTD elections. So some of these bullet points, the RTD board would shrink to 7 seats compared to its current size of 15. The reduction would happen in phases. The governor would gain appointment power over 2 of the seats starting next year in January 2025. So there's our lack of democracy there, where you get political appointments. Like they said, they want to make this more efficient. They want to control it. They don't want to leave it up to the will of the voters. Next bullet point, the board members would represent much larger areas. Of course, we're shrinking the size. So right now, the board member covers around 200,000 residents, which of course is pretty ridiculous if you think that
They're big.
One person can represent 200,000 voters or 200,000 people. Is pretty outrageous to think that at all. And then instead of divided up into 3 large districts with a single board representative each, and the other 4 seats elected by the entire RTD area at large. So there you go. RTD elections would move to, go ahead.
No, keep going through.
RTD elections would move to a ranked choice model, and future board members would get a raise from about $12,000 to $35,000 a year. So what do you think about this, Natalie? After serving on the RTD board, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, the appointments are I'm not thrilled about that, because the governor's the one making the appointments. The size of the districts, there's actually, with my 8 years there were I represented 180,000 people. So we can see they're rounding it to 200,000 here, is probably pretty close. I don't think that's as big of an issue, because the residents really, a majority of it, compared to how many people call about I don't know, speeding or something else like that, there's really not a lot of public comments about public transit because not that many people, frankly, use public transit. All right. But still, the size of the board. So here's the problem that RTD is over $1 billion, and it's a big organization. Comparable is Colorado Department of I'm sorry, it's 1 point, yeah, it's like 1.8 billion for RTD. CDOT is comparable, and CDOT's not just the highways, it's a little bit of like airport, I believe, and they've got the same type budget. So RTD is a big animal, is what I'm trying to say. With that, it's really the representation problem here. I think RTD does need reform. I 100% support reforming RTD, but I think it has to be about financials and about return on investment. And those things have not been addressed. And I could go into long stories about the 8 years there and how I represented the taxpayers and riders within a district, but other districts, it was more about the taxpayer was the very last person being discussed in the boardroom, whereas I found it to be a priority. So that's the reform this needs. I don't see where we fix problems here by having more appointees, which means, frankly, to me, more potential for contracts being awarded to friends of friends and consultant gigs. And I'll swear to God, lately I got enough of that after digging into this Jeffco stuff and knowing how deep money goes. So that's I also don't like, I was on a voting commission for a summer, where we studied voting models, and I support approval voting. I do not prefer this complication called the ranked choice voting. Also within this, right now, if there's any vacancy on this new reform board that Polis is building here, if there is any vacancy, it no longer is the county commissioner or the local government, the largest local government, that would appoint to fill the vacancy. Polis gets to do it again. So the people, even in the elected one, he's further making a more remote decision, if that made sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And it seems like this could, like you said, compound problems with RTD because now you're having, less input from voters, but also more politically driven policies and politically driven choices by the board because they're more going to adhere to what the governor is telling them and some of these other political entities as opposed to looking out for the taxpayers like you did, or even just the riders of these trains and buses.
And I got to look at the title of this slide, Polis back plan to fix RTD's long list of broken promises. I talked about earlier, well, Cal Marcella was going out scouting up jurisdictions to get them on board with a sales tax ballot issue and telling them, oh, we're going to make you this promise, even though the planners and the engineers say that ridership might not be there. But you know what? We'll throw it in there so we get more voters to do this. And then Polis has got this F front range passenger rail, and we don't even know what the ridership's really projected at or any of these other things, especially when you got that weak link that I kind of described there and limited trips. So all that cost, it sure would be nice to know the numbers just a little bit better. So basically my point is, here's Polis saying, RTD, you got a long list of broken promises. Well, guess what, Polis? You probably actually helped contribute because you're out of Boulder and you probably would have wanted to plan. So you actually kind of twisted their arm and, well, I'll help support you in a ballot issue. Make sure we get our train to Boulder. We already got our bus rapid transit, which actually works pretty sweet, but we want the rail. All right, so I'm going to just say I don't have a lot of faith in any of the promises that will be made in this front range passenger rail program. Could be wrong. Could be wrong,
safe
but
That's a safe bet to make, Natalie. I think that
I'm not a gambler really, but history is proving certain things. I mean, Colorado's not the only one that, or Denver Metro, that has seen this very big change in public transit, and it's just not certain cities built around it. Denver is not built around it. Polis is trying to build it into it, but that's a whole other thing. We'll go into that. All right, let's go to the next
all right,
slide.
perfect. Let's move on. So this is still from that same article. Definitely check it out. It just came out yesterday on April 15th or this week. Quoting from the article from CPR.org from Andrew Kinney here, but quote, it has drawn stark opposition from some state house Democrats and local leaders, especially in Denver, because of its changes to RTD's elections. Quote, disappointment and really frustration on behalf of my constituents is how Chantel Lewis, a member of the Denver City Council, described her feelings about the bill. A Denver Council committee is set to vote on a measure formally opposing the bill next week, and Mayor Mike Johnston has expressed concerns too. Continuing in the article, some RTD board members are rallying for a fight over the bill. Board member Michael Guzman is hosting a town hall at the Denver Athletic Club Monday night, advertising it as an urgent gathering about the right to representation and to a world class public transportation system. RTD has a budget of nearly $900 million with more than 3 million people living in its 8 county service area. Any comments on this slide?
I meant to make that meeting and I didn't do it. Sad I didn't. That's all I got to say on that one. I did. Chantel and Lewis and I served together, and she has the same. We although very different political views generally, also agreed on some of the accountability standards with RTD, and so not surprised she was standing up as now Denver City Councilor. And by the way, I think Denver may have voted, and I think it's probably a good time here to insert tonight at 4 p.m. The RTD board voted to take a position and voted unanimously to oppose House Bill 1447, which is like, it's about time. I mean, you got to wait till like the last minute. They thought they were going to negotiate out of this, and there may be some amendments tomorrow. Maybe it could be laid over. There was rumors going around about both this afternoon, but expectation is right now it's going forward because Polis ain't going to drop this.
Exactly. The time in the session is running out. They really
Yep.
want to push this through. This is benchmark legislation for Polis and Fenberg. Fenberg's term limited. So this is something he's definitely going to, with his big buddy Polis there, try and push through. But got one more slide from this same CPR article. So check this article out. A lot of good information in it. This is quoting directly from that article. The proposal comes as state leaders are increasingly interested in RTD's future. The Polis administration wants to use RTD's money and expertise to build a section of the proposed Front Range passenger rail line, the long-awaited train to Boulder. Additionally, the bill would set new expectations about RTD coordinating with local governments. Even among the bill's opponents, there is acknowledgement that reforming RTD might be necessary. Its elections for low paying seats on a relatively little known board sometimes struggle to attract candidates. A few recent elections have been decided entirely by write in votes. And there's been growing frustration and anger over RTD's management as the district struggles to grow ridership despite completing most of the Fast Tracks rail project. The board needs a major change, Lindstedt said. So I really wanted to include that line there about RTD struggling to grow ridership. This all these fast tracks, all these bus lines, everything they're so proud of, and people just aren't that interested. People love the freedom of their cars, and it's just much more convenient. You can't, especially now that you don't have plastic grocery bags. How are you supposed to go to the supermarket, come back on a train with an armful of meat and potatoes, right?
You get one of those ox hook neck things, and they got little hooks on the end, and you can carry 2 bags. Well, everything that'll fit on the hooks.
I don't think you'd fit through the light rail door there.
You just got to turn.
All right, moving on here. As you mentioned before in that article or in
By
that
the way,
bill,
go back to one slide. So it's going back because I got to mention this. So it says, oh, no, go back. Forward now, forward. Oh, now we're all mixed up. Okay. A few recent elections have been decided entirely by write-in
oh
votes.
yeah,
No, you were there. 1447 got rid of that. It won't allow write-ins. I don't even know how they can do that for like 1 seat.
wow.
Every other election I know of, president, I would think as long as somebody declares write-in, there's going to be the write-in slot. That's how that appears. They get rid of it. I thought that was just really ironic considering recent elections. All right, you move forward now.
No, it's a great point. So this is from the Colorado Sun, a Jesse article back from March 14th. Of course, as you mentioned, I think this bears repeating again. A Colorado
Yep.
rental car tax hike would raise money for Front Range and Mountain passenger rail systems. So they would think they're going to get $50 million a year from that. So there you go. Just wanted to at least point that out and give people another resource if they want to learn more about that from that article link there at the bottom.
Well, and I don't think you talk about, come to think of it, the upcoming sales tax hike, right? Do you have a slide on that? No. So this is a good.
I don't think so.
Okay, so that's a good time to mention this. So not the rental car. I mean, everybody's saying, "Oh, it's the tourists; they'll get to pay for this whole thing." No, folks, that's not the way it is. There's a bill that's going to be coming in that will be a sales tax issue for this November. So that's an interesting playing card that's now popped up, because there are some other things that may have said, "Oh, we're going to get the governor's pat on the head to go and do a statewide ballot issue." I think this one will be his top priority. There's already one, and I can't think what it is. RTDD Tabor. So just wanted to throw that in because folks, you may be thinking, "Ooh, cool train." Well, whether you use it or not, you may be paying for it. And many people might be surprised what they pay to RTD in a year. The average is $350 per person on an average. In RTD tax. So if you add on now Front Range passenger rail, that sales tax goes through. And how many times you use it? I mean, is that going to be worth $700 or whatever that number is? But the rest of the funding picture has not popped up its head yet. Here with what, 6 weeks left in the session, a little less than
Yeah.
that.
No, great point. Great point.
Okay.
Uh, let's take a look here. So I wanted to share this article as well. The skepticism about passenger rail and RTD in general. This is an article here from March 29th, updated April 5th in the Denver Gazette. Long, hot, frustrating summer in store. Denver RTD light rail transit users. So RTD is undertaking a $152 million renovation of rail lines that'll shut down 5.3 miles of the downtown loop rail service, delay train arrivals, and divert many outlying trains to Union Station rather than their customary downtown endpoints. So you can imagine what that's going to do to ridership, of course. Starting in May, RTD's rail service will be disrupted for the next 2 summers by the reconstruction project. Quote, "The track was built to last 30 years, said Stuart Summers, Chief Communications and Engagement Officer at RTD. It opened October 7th, 1994. We've hit the 30-year mark, so we feel really good about that. It's got its useful life out of it, and now we need to rebuild it for 30 more years." So, what was that initial cost 30 years ago to build all of this? And now they have to pour another $152 million into this. I mean, this is an expensive program that people probably don't realize how much it costs just to maintain this RTD system, especially with the trains.
Yeah, all you got to do, and this is not just RTD, but you listen to this one of those agenda items that most people will just cringe if they even hear it, which is capital improvement projects, CIP. And a lot of governments are got a mission creep frame of mind where build new, build new, build new, but then the maintenance in the back end and the overhead for doing that doesn't get considered, and it gets sometimes very much understated. And when they do those financial analysis of what's this new program going to cost.
Yeah, I mean, look
Good
at the
stuff,
roads.
but it can get expensive.
They can't even maintain the roads with all the potholes and problems everywhere. I mean, drive I-25, drive I-70, go through the Denver metro area. It's a disaster. Colorado with our weather and our our intense sunlight, it destroys the roads, and it's no surprise that RTD has to spend a lot of money to maintain this. I mean, it's a lot of money. You could buy everybody a car for that. Everybody who uses RTD, you could buy them a car or two with the amount of money they spend on this.
Well, it's the finances at RTD at some point has got to, that's part of the reform I'd like to see is even though there have been some improvements in illustrating these costs, there have been other areas that have not been highlighted and they're not as easily seen. So anyway, I won't go off that thread.
So moving along, here's an article from Complete Colorado, great website, page2.completecolorado.com, from back in February from Greg Walcher, Colorado's Front Range Rail Scheme, the wave of the past. To quote briefly from the article, how do Colorado leaders respond to this clear long-term national trend? And that's people not using mass transit. By proposing to spend over $14 billion on a Front Range rail project, of course. They claim it would carry over 2 million passengers annually between Pueblo and Fort Collins, primarily on existing tracks. They point to the 160,000 cars a day counted on I-25 at Castle Pines. But those cars are not all going to the same place. So where would you put the stations so those people would not still need their cars? In fact, as history shows, such a train would not carry 2 million passengers a year, no matter how much is spent on it. People may tell pollsters they would love to ride it, but when all is said and done, they won't.
It
So it's
brings
a
in
good,
certainly a lot of questions, and that's where there's this thing called the fare box recovery ratio. Uh, Not a common term. It's in Colorado state law. At one point in RTD's case, it required that fares covered 30% of the fare rate of the cost of providing that ride. And it really is called a boarding. I only say that just because getting in the weeds, but they would boil the cost per boarding down. And RTD now has pretty much eliminated that report. And state law was changed where it no longer had to be 30%. Now they're covering maybe 10%. Some people have said 5%, covering the cost of that. So this is really important stuff when they are making the claims of 2 million passengers a year, and they're building out these models saying, well, we're going to charge everybody, I don't know what, $10 to go from top of the state to bottom of the state. Well, all right, but how much does it cost? We got to look at both sides of this. And is this appointed board going to do a better job at being financially responsible for return on investment? I don't know that there's any guarantee about that. Do any one of them step in and go, my number one thing I'm here to do, my job is for taxpayers? Or is it to fulfill, a train that takes, when grandma comes to town, or, your niece or whatever, you go on a train trip like the Zephyr trip? Is it really for transit, or is it used for more recreational? What are these returns? I know way too much about this stuff, so we better move on.
yeah, no, great point. But
Otherwise, I'll ramble.
I encourage people to check out that article because it talks about the nationwide trends of people using less mass transit than ever. People are not taking buses as much as they used to. They're not taking the trains as much as they used to. They're not doing mass transit as much as they used to. So, it's kind of this out of date idea for this passenger rail system. So that's kind of that distilled version of that article. Another great article on Complete Colorado page 2 is from John Caldera of the Independence Institute. Drive a stake through undead Front Range Rail. Just to quickly read through this, he says in the early 70s, the Regional Transportation District, RTD, got voter approval for a half a penny on a dollar sales tax. The promise was by 1980, they'd fully built 128 miles of fixed guideway rail, and the tax would to be cut in half, used only for operations. You might have noticed that not only was that promise not kept, it wasn't even started. However, the tax stayed. In the grand tradition of why charge once when you can charge taxpayers twice, RTD conned voters again in 2004 to raise the sales tax to a full penny a dollar for their $4 billion fast track scheme. Funny thing though, the fast track's price tag nearly doubled to well over $7.5 billion. And while the whole system was promised to be completed by 2017, just like the early 1970s Broken Promise, the longest rail line from Denver to Longmont hasn't even been started, maybe never will.
Yeah, because projections right now put it at completion about year 2050, 2048. Yeah, compared to
Wow.
2017.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Wow. So talking about some skepticism, a lot of reason to be skeptical, of course, of government programs in general, but in particular about passenger rail, about mass transit, about this governance idea of how they're going to try and approach this scheme here.
Just the debt that RTD carries right now, and that is the first check you cut. The debt load, just I'll stop there. That's some people don't think about, but It's a huge debt measure. And what it is doing right now is that's so big that bus is there's called the base system and then the fast track system. The base is the buses. Well, that's that 6/10 of a penny. Is getting ready to subsidize fast tracks because the amount of the debt. And it's those kind of dollars, and you add in again the capital improvement just from the whole entire old system. It's and the ridership not materializing. If you don't have fare recovery, if you don't get the fares, forget about the recovery part. If you just don't get people riding, how are you going to make that work?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question.
And I mean, there was a huge change when I got on the board in 2012, the election 2012, sworn in 2013. Like within a year and a half right after that, that's really when the transportation network sharing came in. It was the Uber, the Lyft, and and then all of a sudden it took off. And I mean, look, even going downtown, how many people are using the Lime little scooter things?
Yeah.
And they're not getting on the 16th Street Mall shuttle or the Lincoln, the Zero bus. They're grabbing a little scooter thing. And anyway,
Well, that's a great point. And
changed.
there's bills in the state legislature this year to kind of, I hate to say crack down, but definitely go after and further regulate the rideshare companies that are out there that are providing this great service to the people who'd rather, rather rent take a private car, have somebody else drive you downtown for a sports game or something like that, or a concert, rather than take a bus or a train that's going to take twice as long. Sure, it's cheap, but it's going to take you out an hour or more to get down there. You can take, 15, 20 minutes in an Uber or a Lyft. Sure, you pay a little more, but for a lot of people, it's worth it. And I'd
Yeah,
say
there's
one of the reasons it's worth it is because as anybody who pays attention to the news, you probably see it nearly every week or every couple weeks that RTD is a place where a lot of crime happens. This is from just going through these articles briefly. February 6, 2024, one person hospitalized after stabbing at RTD station in West Denver. Here's February 15th. Man fatally shot after approaching 13-year-old boy on our Denver RTD bus. January 22nd of this year. These are all this year. Man killed in RTD bus shooting identified. Here's one from March 21st, 2024. Two suspects arrested after allegedly beating man at light rail station. March 26, 2024. As crime in RTD soars, RTD finds itself in the front lines. And then here's an article from last year. I wanted to point this one out, even though it was from last year. Data shows hundreds of RTD operators received pay time off due to drug exposure. Nearly 200 operators took leave between April and August of 2023 because of that. I mean, that is absolutely and utterly crazy that there'd be so much crime, so much drug use, so many problems in RTD. So you talk about other options that people have, whether it's to drive their own car, to take a bus, or to take an Uber, take a Lyft, do any of these options. For most people, if you can afford it, you're not taking a bus, you're not taking the light rail. You want to have control over when you can leave, when you can go, and avoid any potential crime or drug exposure, even. I mean, if you think of that 200 operators lost out on being able to work because of drug exposure, I mean, what does that mean for passengers? How many passengers were unwittingly or unknowingly exposed to drug exposure just taking RTD last year? I mean, 200 operators, you're probably talking, I can only imagine, right? Total speculation here, but hundreds, if not 1,000 or more individuals who potentially were exposed to drugs and RTD. So definitely a rough spot there. Definitely a rough place, and a reason why people might be skeptical about taking public transit at all. And what are you going to do with this passenger rail system? Is it really going to be able to provide better security or better safety, better precautions for these people, and at what cost? So kind of going through that, Natalie, looking at the concluding thoughts on Front Range Rail, love to hear your thoughts on some of this. This is our last slide here, so we'll kind of wrap it up with this.
Yeah, so just going with, first of all, looking at the history of fast tracks, underestimated costs, inflated ridership. Those should be red flags as we look at the Front Range Passenger Rail Plan. just the dishonest use of fees instead of taxes to get the program kick started. Then with an upcoming sales tax that, as Polis not really talking about that. Return on investment. That's where RTD needs to be proving what we're doing now before we even start to add on. That shared weak link that I described in the map that hinges upon really infringing or interrupting, potentially BNSF. I think Union Pacific also tied into that. Looking at neighboring states, that's where is this working? How's public transit working? We're seeing nationwide changes that very much are like our current situation. Is that really RTD, or is that just the way people want to travel? Does that fit them picking up the 50 pounds a bag of dog food and making 3 trips within 45 minutes, 3, things they're doing versus 3 hours to do something? There's concerns about eminent domain. The one bill, and I'm trying to remember out of the web there, talking about, I think it's also 14, the transportation reform. It tells RTD to use the public land we own to encourage development. That's a problem that we've seen in the past with RTD becoming a property manager. We're the taxpayer own the land, RTD manage the property for subsidized housing or other things. It would probably be along those lines. That's not the role of RTD. That would be adding a mission to their purpose that I don't want to see happen. Certificates of participation. Maybe voters would approve debt. What I've seen also occur, though, is government use of certificates of participation. Basically, that is a debt mechanism. They don't go to the voters to ask for, it's almost like a fee, but it's a COP in the debt world. So this is, again, how they're going to pay for all these things using a debt mechanism like COP where we don't even get a way in. I mean, they're taking away board elected members, taking away boards that are, elected by the population. Those concerns mimic one another. Then, as I think I've hit everything there, sales tax ballot question, those are the concluding thoughts. And they're pitching all of this really at the last minute here with 6 weeks to go. And the amount of stakeholders, and that's not even including the voters in all of these parts of this decision. There's just a lot of red flags about it. I'm sure it would be just lovely to travel on a train from the south end of the state to the north, but honestly, I can't really think of the next need I have to do that. So I may not be alone, but I'm sure for some it'd be nice, but is that really a priority right now?
Believe it is. When I really think the key too about the neighboring states is that not only is this program possibly destined to fail, in my mind, destined to fail in Colorado, but we've seen what happened in Utah, we've seen in these other states. Like you said, it's the freedom and convenience of having a vehicle. And overall, it's this idea of centrally planning society that these politicians are so wrong about. They can totally redesign society, and everybody's going to go along with their whims, and they know what's best of how we should live our lives. And those ideas always fail. The car allows people to make their own decisions, to really create markets around automobiles, because they can go here, they can go there. They're not relying on some centrally planned train or bus to tell them where they can and can't go. It's just distorting the market, distorting people's ability to travel. And that's why so many of these schemes often fail, because they don't account for the individual who just wants to make their own decisions, who maybe wants to go to this restaurant one day and go explore somewhere else. And if there's not a bus getting there, then they're not going to be able to get there if they don't have a car, right?
Yeah, and I gotta think, what's the joke? That's not a joke line. If it moves, tax it, or whatever the thing is. Or if it breathes, or if it moves, tax it. One of the bills we didn't even cover in this is Senate Bill, forget the year, but I know it's Senate Bill 260. And that is one that added on the delivery fee for like Uber, Lyft, Amazon. And you go to order on Amazon, you get 27 cents. So the thought was, well, people are using all of these like Uber Eats and all of this, and we're not getting our money for the roads. But meanwhile, they don't want people to have car, so they're going to get then that 50-pound bag of dog food delivered, right? So it moves, we're going to tax it.
Yeah.
I mean, how many ways can you do that?
As many as they can come up with. And it's
Unlimited, I guess. Why am I asking that? Forget I asked.
Well, Natalie, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this. Really appreciate your insight after serving on the RTD board for 8 years. And it'll be very interesting to see where this conversation continues. Hopefully, the voters and the taxpayers can see through some of the pipe dreams of the governor and the Senate
Maybe I
president.
should run for RTD. I was known as the rabble rouser.
There you go. Well, definitely continue all your activism and everything you do. Really appreciate you, and I'm very thankful for everything that you do. And look forward to talking to you again soon. I know there's a lot of things we could talk about with this legislature, so I hope to get you back on here in the near future.
Yeah, we thought we could cover this in 10 minutes. Sorry, folks. There's just too much.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us. But hopefully too, just to bring it up, this is something I don't think really anybody else out there is doing. So us getting together and covering these topics and going into detail and providing this information to the voter, to the taxpayer, to other concerned parties, I think it's something valuable that is pretty neat that we're able to do this and get this information out there to people.
That's all thanks to you, Brandon.
I'll appreciate it. We'll hope to talk to you soon, Natalie, but we'll go ahead and cut it off at this point. So thank you and best wishes. Have a great rest of your night.
You too.